Do you ever feel like you are guesting on podcasts or even producing your own show in a vacuum with very little human interaction and no real idea of how to grow? Been there, done that. If so, this episode on engagement strategies with my friend Kevin Chemidlin is for you. Hey there, pitches. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Go Pitch Yourself. My name is Angie Trueblood, and I am your fearless leader and the founder of the Podwize group. And I am very privileged that you are spending this part of your day with me. So today's episode is the last in our Summer Lovin' series, which is a compilation of our past top downloaded episodes. This one is back from a little over a year ago in May of 2022, which actually is this is our second one for May of 2022. It was a very good month. And it is a conversation with Kevin Chemidlin, who hosts the Grow the Show podcast. In it, Kevin and I chat about why having a really narrow idea of potential audience demographics for a podcast can actually lead to growth. Details of his signature approach to growth that he calls targeted daily engagement. And then I come at it from the side of guesting and how that targeted daily engagement can be used to help podcast guests connect with potential hosts. So this episode was really popular because Kevin does not hold back on sharing his key strategies around podcast growth, engagement, and really focusing your message for a specific niche. Now, I know many of us struggle with social media, and Kevin offers up a different way to approach the platform that you choose to spend time on as a marketing platform or maybe even a connection platform. So tune in. I think you're going to love it. I hope you love it as much this time around as you did the first. Kevin, I am so excited to have you on Go Pitch Yourself. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. I'm so pumped to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So I connected with you. I forget exactly where I landed on you, but I became appropriately obsessed because you had a local podcast and then kind of took that and what you learned from the local podcast transitioned into helping podcasters grow their show. So for my listeners who are not following you yet, could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do in the podcasting space?
Yeah. So way back in the ancient podcasting times of 2018, I was a software developer at a big health insurance company and was not super passionate about health insurance software, believe it or not.
And that's so exciting.
Right. But I was passionate about my home city of Philadelphia and got particularly inspired one day listening to How I Built This with Guy Raz when they featured a company that I didn't realize it, but was built in Philly. So one morning, listened to this episode, listened to this Philly story told in a very cinematic audio way, and just got literally obsessed to use that word again. And thought, I want to do this. I want to have a podcast like this, but tell Philly stories like How I Built This tells everybody else's story. So spent about 4 months-ish figuring out how to do that, how every other podcaster learns, right? Go to YouTube University, what mic do I use, all that stuff. Then launched my local show, Philly Who, in May of 2018. Was a little trigger happy, and 2 or 3 months later, left my full-time job to be a full-time podcaster. And let me tell you, the looks that I got from people in 2018 when I said I was leaving my 6-figure software job to be a full-time podcaster were pretty funny. Wish I would have taken pictures. And then the year after leaving, so the show got a little bit of success early on. Like as far as podcast launches go, it did very well. It got 250 downloads on the first day, and it got some buzz. So I thought, I was this unstoppable genius.
Watch out, Guy Raz. Watch out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So fast forward a year, and I learned the hard way that I actually didn't know how to grow an audience or how to monetize. Like I had figured out how to produce episodes every week, but I just wasn't as good as at that stuff as I thought. And after all of my savings were gone and, the show didn't make any money, it stopped growing. I was, really in a tough spot. So managed to put the show on hold, break the almighty consistency rule, and just kind of like look around and be like, how are podcasters actually growing and monetizing? Because a lot of the advice that's out there just doesn't work. It's what everyone's doing, and everyone is having trouble growing their show. So maybe we should do something else, right?
Well, and some of those things, in fairness, could have worked, 8 years ago.
Exactly. And you're right. Like there are things that worked when podcasting itself was niche, right? And there were very few people listening. And so you can kind of be the only horse in town and just put a show out there. And after 5 years, it would be big because podcasting itself grew like crazy. But that doesn't work anymore. And so, kind of the short story is I was lucky enough to look into people who are actually doing it. Like I spent a whole weekend while the show was on break and literally walked like probably 20 miles and just like sampled and listened to every podcast in the top 100 to see what are these shows doing? How are they making money? How are they growing? And of course, it was nothing that I was doing that everyone else says you should do. And so after that, after learning actual strategies, which I can go into if you want, I know I'm kind of glazing over it here, was able to take Philly Who, my local show, past six figures. So 2019, the show made about between $120,000 and $140,000. I don't remember exactly, and it just kind of depends on. Some people consider different pieces of monetization direct or not. I can get into that if you want.
No,
but
I mean, I think that the big thing there is like in a year, you had a podcast that grew to that level of income. I mean, yeah.
And so, like, it was painful at first, but then it was like, wow, and I was able to, just kind of do what a lot of podcasters dream of doing. I'm so lucky to say, which is, spend their time just doing that show. And, I was working at that point, 20 to 40 hours a week on it and like traveling and stuff. And I started talking with other podcasters and they all said, how the heck did you grow? How the heck did you monetize? And I was like, wow, I didn't realize other people had the same pain that I had. Why wouldn't I realize that? Right. But, and then started grow the show.
All right. So you're doing Grow the Show, and that is what you're doing exclusively now, correct?
That's right. So, shortly after COVID, had a couple months where I wasn't really doing anything, and it drove me nuts because I'm this like entrepreneur who's always got to have something that I'm chasing, which is a blessing and a curse. And
totally is.
Then I thought I was going to start a new show about how to be a great interviewer because I thought that that's what the podcast industry needed. Because I was like, oh, these people need, we should all be better interviewers. So a mentor of mine said, okay, cool. But before you go build a course and build a new, do all and like buy the domain and everything, go talk to a dozen podcasters and see if that's what they actually want, right? See if that's what they would pay for is help with interviewing. So I did that. I wound up, because I had a decent network, I wound up talking with 30 podcasters, and across the board, all of them thought they were the best interviewers on the planet.
Of course.
And I was like, okay, maybe they're not, but also if they believe they are, they're not going to buy a course, right?
Yeah, they might need this, but they don't actually want it.
Right. So when asking like what they actually needed help with, every single one of them, regardless of how long they've been podcasting, whether they were for a company or independent or entertainment or how to, just across the board, every single one of them was just like, how do I get more listeners and how do I monetize like you did? And I was like, holy crap, this is clearly an opportunity. Yeah. So growtheshow.com is available, and I started helping independent podcasters to learn how to get new listeners and make more money with their show. And that started in June of 2020. And right now we're recording on March 1st, 2022. And we have about 185 clients in the accelerator program. The Grow the Show podcast has been around since October 2020. And we have several thousand downloads per episode. We got a Facebook group with about 2,000 podcasters in it. So it's grown into this thing, which was way beyond what I really ever imagined. I thought maybe I'd have some one-on-one, I would just coach people on the side or whatever, but it's it's grown to so much more than that, to the point where I was like, wow, I wanted to leave home. Like it has nothing to do with Philly, but it was just, I just want to like go somewhere else and focus on this because it's going so well. Like it would be a crime not to, right? So that's where we are.
Did you feel like you needed to leave Philly to be able to focus on it? Like what was like the rationale of that?
Yeah, like I needed to, not necessarily Philly. I needed to leave home, right? So I don't think it has anything to do with Philadelphia itself, which I know that there's a lot of people in Philadelphia who aren't going to understand that, and that's fine or agree with it. But what I have learned so far is that a business tends to grow to the competency of the entrepreneur. And I really like Grow the Show would keep getting stuck, and it would get stuck because of me, because of traits or behaviors or habits or beliefs that I had. This is how I'm looking at it anyway.
Yeah.
And, I just found that around Philadelphia, the life that I had built was around the person that I used to be when I was a 9 to 5 software developer, which had tons of habits and relationships that did not serve, an entrepreneur who's looking to grow a company.
Yeah.
So could I have fought through that and just like made changes and stayed home? Sure, probably. But having met so many other entrepreneurs who I admire, who have grown their ventures so large, they like across the board, most of them had left home to build the thing.
Yeah.
So, I was like, okay, I had been dating my girlfriend for a year. She was totally into the idea of moving, because she also always lived in Philadelphia. And the other thing, not to harp on this too much, but one thing that I noticed through deeply interviewing 80 really successful Philadelphians was virtually all of them who were from Philly and then came back to impact the city left for a significant amount of time.
Wow.
And lived somewhere else and learned something else and then came back.
I think that moving away from home is super important. So, like for my undergrad, I only went to school 45 minutes from home. I mean, I lived there, but it wasn't. But when I moved to Miami, I was there 2 years. And I remember, gosh, I was young. I mean, I think I was 24 when I moved there. I moved by myself. My now best friend actually ended up tagging along. Like we were roommates over the summer before I left. And she saw me prepping to go. And she was like, actually, I think I need to get away from home. Would it be okay if So she lived in my dining room. I only had a 1-bedroom apartment. But I remember the first Thanksgiving that I was down there. It makes me smile and laugh a little bit now. But I wrote a letter back home because I didn't go home for Thanksgiving about just the impact of living. And Miami is such a cultural mix.
Yes.
And to see people that have fought so hard to get to the US, it really just made me appreciate the privilege that I had grown up in, which in Virginia didn't seem like much privilege compared to other people.
Yeah.
But down there, it just made me really appreciate the bigger world. And as an entrepreneur, I think you have to have that perspective in order to recognize, oh, there's growth beyond what I can even imagine.
Exactly. And it's not about leaving Philadelphia. It's about leaving the old me and just kind of having a blank slate to build new habits and build a new me. Like, for instance, I quit drinking. I used to drink a lot, like socially, totally socially. But there came a point, because that's, what you do when you have a 9 to 5. You drink Thursday nights, Friday night, and Saturday night, sometimes Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
And so a lot of
cost.
There's a massive cost, and more so once you turn 30.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of my relationships that I have built and maintained in Philadelphia were built around drinking. So there's nothing against drinking. I'm not going to not drink ever again. But, it's just one of those things where I found one example of a thing that was of a really deep ingrained habit that I had built that was really, really starting to hinder what I wanted to do. And so, I was like, I can just sit here and like tell all of these friends no every Saturday and Sunday that I can't hang out with them, and walk by my former watering hole every day and think, oh, it'd be fun to go. Or I can just go somewhere, and this is just one example. Or I could just go somewhere new, completely build from scratch, new habits, no distractions, and just go all in for 2 to 3 years and see where the heck this takes me.
Yeah. So I am going to say then, hearing this story, because I don't think I've ever heard this part of your story.
No, I haven't shared it.
Oh, look at that interviewing skill. What I'm hearing is that, yes, we're going to talk strategies, and I'm sure those strategies helped you build Philly Who and ultimately grow the show. But it sounds like there was a lot of inner work and growth that was going on that probably fueled a lot of these strategies.
Absolutely.
So let's get into those.
Fantastic. Let's dig in.
All right. So when you had this local show and then you also launched Grow the Show, I would love to know what were some of the differences and similarities that you identified in growing those two different types of shows.
So I think the unfair advantage that I had here is that I started with a local show.
Okay.
For a number of reasons. It has a very, very physical limitation on the audience size, right? It's a very, very clear thing. It's people are either interested in Philadelphia or they're not.
Right.
And within that space, I was able to learn how to build a podcast audience one listener at a time. And that's how you have to start, in my opinion, one listener at a time. Because we all jump to scale. We all want to impact as many people as we possibly can, have the biggest, broadest audience, and be famous and all that stuff. Everybody wants that, right? We all want that. The problem is that the vast majority of podcasters and anybody who's looking to build an online audience goes for that. Like they make decisions day one with the aim towards having the biggest audience that they possibly can on on year 5, year 10.
Right.
And those decisions actually prevent them from having any audience at all. And so what I mean by that is being more specific, right? Just like being, I say painfully, someone said, hey, you should probably make it more uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable specific. However, sometimes it's painful, right? Because our instinct is, I want the biggest audience possible. I want to impact everyone, right? And when we're starting out with this, we're like, literally anybody who might be interested in what I have to share, I want to listen to this podcast. And it's that thinking that actually is the undoing of growth.
Especially these days, because no longer can you just launch, like if it's a business podcast, you can't just launch an interview podcast interviewing different successful business owners, right? I feel like that's super hard.
Right, it is. And because it's vague. Like it's like, what does that even mean? Who are you? Like so first of all, there's the competition, right? There's so many other podcasters that are trying to play in the very, very broad space. But what podcasters need to understand, and getting back to your question, like this is what I accidentally got with Philly Who, which is why I think I've been well served to help other people grow non-local audiences, which is when people discover your show, they need to have this feeling, holy crap, I can't believe this exists. This feels like it was made for me, right? That's the feeling that we aim to inspire with our podcast listeners. And the only way to do that is to define your audience and angle your show in a way that is uncomfortably specific, where you should have the thought, I think this audience might be too small. If you have that thought, you've just begun defining an audience that will actually resonate with whatever it is you're putting out there, right? Because it'll be something so specific to their truth and to their life that you will become their favorite podcast.
Yeah. Can you give some specifics, like just a specific example of what that might entail from someone either in the accelerator or in the Grow the Show community? Because I'm a part of that community. I love it. Listeners, definitely go join. We'll link to
thank
it.
you.
But I've seen listeners in there and it's hard. So I would love just an example so listeners can kind of get a sense of how specific.
Yeah. So the framework, I'll share the framework and then I can share some actual like real life examples.
Yeah.
So the framework that we use, we call it blanks who blank and blank. And the idea is you should define your audience such that every single listener of your podcast must have 3 objective characteristics. Objective meaning they either do or they don't, like it can be proven, right? And so blanks who blank and blank. So for me, for the Philly show, that podcast is not for Philadelphians. That's 1.7 million people. That's still too broad. It's too broad, right? Because think about how many different Philadelphians there are, very, very, very different classes and ethnicities and opinions. And like, it's just, there's too many. So Philly Who is for Philadelphians who are positively passionate about the city, because there's plenty of Philadelphians who are negatively passionate about the city, right? And aspire to be a change maker in the city, because there are plenty of people who are positive about the city and don't aspire to be a change maker in the city, right? So those 3, and I basically, as I made that show, I would later learn, I only made that show for people who are all 3 of those things. For Grow the Show, I do not make the Grow the Show podcast for people who have not launched a podcast yet. My Grow the Show audience statement is podcasters who have already launched and are stuck at their current growth level, right? Because if it was just for podcasters, then it wouldn't resonate as much for the people who do tune in and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's listening to my phone calls, right?
Yeah.
So those are how, kind of how I define my audience.
Yeah, that's super clear. Like even just sharing yours, I think will illuminate even to me, I'm like, oh, I think I could get a little bit more specific in who I feel like my show is for. Because once you have that, then every decision that you make about your show, it's clear. You just look back to who you're talking to and does this fit into that?
That is the benefit that I don't talk about first, but is actually more powerful in my opinion, which is, primarily, it makes it more clear to the prospective listener who the show is for. And, like I said before, if somebody doesn't feel like it was tailor-made for them and they're not actually surprised that it's so perfectly made for them, they're not going to listen at all unless you are a massive celebrity. And by the way, there are past presidents who are having trouble getting people to listen to their show. So your name, even if you are one of the most famous people alive, is not going to carry it. It's got to be, this level of service to your listener. But in addition to that, it serves as a mission statement for you and your audience. And it literally makes 1,000 decisions for you, eliminates 1,000,000 more, and it actually makes it way, way, way more fun to make the thing because you have this playpen of audience definition to play in, and you make better content as well, right? And it's just a flywheel, and it better serves that specific group because it just continuously self-reinforces and just makes a show that's super growable because, again, our first instinct is, well, that audience is super small. Like I want to be massive. I want to be famous. But the thing is, it's that core group of people that are just going to be so over the moon that you're serving them because nobody else is, because everyone else is trying to serve everyone at the same time, that they will be so fervent. There will be such raving fans that they will then carry you to serve a wider audience later in the future.
Well, this leads into one of the strategies that I feel like is one of your signature approaches. And I think it's how you connected one-to-one with so many Philadelphians, and then probably also your Grow the Show listeners, the targeted daily engagement. So I think it has to do with social, right? I know it does, actually. Yeah. Which I know a lot of my listeners are like, social media. We're kind of at that point sometimes in life where it almost seems like one more thing we have to do. But I feel like your approach turns that on its head a little bit into your interacting. So can you share that with our listeners? And then we'll kind of chat through that a bit.
Absolutely. Happy to. So TDE, Targeted Daily Engagement, it's our flagship framework for early growth at a podcast here at Grow the Show. And it uses social media. And the idea is that you spend 15 to 30 minutes a day, maximum, engaging with your dream listeners on social media. And before anybody says, I don't have time for that, the first thing that you need to do is open up the Screen Time app on your phone and see how much time you averaged on social media daily per week. See that it's between 4 and 8 hours. And understand that you,
Kevin. I am not doing that.
So just anybody listening who says, I don't have time for that, I want you to pull that up and see that you are actually spending about 25 times that every single day on social media and not growing your audience. And this is going to grow your audience 15 minutes a day. Yeah. So the way that it works is there's basically 3 things that you can do on social media. The first thing is what everyone is doing 8 hours a day, which is consume, scroll, 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 right? That does nothing for you. It does nothing for your audience. It just lines Uncle Zuck's pockets. The second thing is publish, post, post, post. That's what most podcasters and business owners are doing, thinking it's going to expand their reach and grow their audience. But it actually doesn't, because nobody sees the posts, right? If you have 100 followers and you post 6 times a week, 10 people are going to see the same 6 posts over and over again. How is that supposed to grow your audience? But the third thing that you can do on social media, which is where everything unlocks, and once you start doing this, people in your life start to think of you as somebody who, quote unquote, gets social media. You're a social media person, regardless of your age, by the way. And that's to engage. And that's to use social media socially, right? The way that it's what it's there for, to actually interact with other human beings. And I'll tell you, it's like, Angie, I swear, people start doing this, they'll do it for 5 minutes and they'll start to see results immediately. And they'll be like, what the heck? And then suddenly it's way more fun to use social media, right? So the caveat to this is, if you define your audience as women or as entrepreneurs or as people in sales or something that's very broad, remember, go back to blanks who blank and blank. So if your audience definition is broad and it is not 3 characteristics where all 3 of those must be true, then this isn't going to work and you're going to burn yourself out. So the first part is really, really targeted. You should have that really deep audience definition first. Daily, every single day, put a 15-minute appointment on your calendar with yourself, right? And everyone's like, oh, yeah, I've heard that before. No, actually do it. Put it on your calendar so that it's blocked. And if somebody tries to book an appointment with you, then either move it to a different time in the day or say no. The third prerequisite is to clean up your social media, because another thing that people say are like, oh, I don't want to get sucked into social media. And yes, I will grant you, these apps were, built by hundreds of people with like multiple PhDs and getting us addicted to stuff. So the other prerequisite that I recommend is, clean up your feed as much as you can. Unfollow all the people that you went to high school with and you weren't even friends in high school, but for some reason you're seeing pictures of their kids every Sunday at breweries. Like, just get that out of your feed. You don't need it. You don't need that to take your attention. Stuff like that. Unfollow literally everyone. If you're afraid they're going to be mad, just mute them. So that literally your feed is just really, really clean. It's just, people that you admire, people that you get value from. And then every single day, you simply go to where your dream listeners, your blanks who blank and blank, are already interacting with other blanks who blank and blank online, and interact with them, engage with them, celebrate their wins, answer their questions, share your perspective, make an internet friend, and you will be floored at how quickly your online audience grows. And it's really that simple. Like, it sounds too good to be true, but like I said, it's the flagship here at Grow the Show. I hear from people, just listeners of the podcast, not even people, not even clients in the accelerator, but people who listen to the show will DM me and say, "Hey, we went from 100, and this sounds too good to be true. I grant you that, but I'm telling you." They were like, "Hey, we had 100 downloads per episode and we started doing TDE and now we have 1,000. And so thank you for that." I'm like, well, like, it's to the point where I'm like, "Can you send me screenshots? Because that sounds kind of crazy." And they do. And I'm like, that's insane. So it sounds too good to be true, but it's really, really that simple. It's a habit to build. Like, the hardest part is, number one, being specific enough with your audience and resisting the urge to be as broad as possible. Number two, cleaning up your feed so you don't get sucked in. And number three, just staying consistent and doing it every single day for 15 minutes.
So are there particular platforms that your people have found success with? Like, I'm picturing Instagram because that's the platform I'm more drawn to right now. And I'm thinking it could involve searching particular hashtags and seeing, where some of the folks who are looking for the type of content that I produce might be interested in. But is it pretty much the same on every platform once you account for the nuances of that platform?
Yeah, so there's really two categories of where to do it. There's the first category, which is like forums and groups where, your target audience goes to interact with each other online. So let's say we're talking about my audience at Grow the Show, podcasters who have already launched and are stuck in their current growth level. I would ask, okay, where do they go to interact with other podcasters who have already launched and are stuck at their growth level? So those are the more community places. Those are usually in the form of Facebook groups or Discord channels, sometimes subreddits or forums. Yep. So that's one place to do it. But now a lot of folks that I work with and that follow what we do at Grow the Show will combine that with what I'm about to say, which is for platforms that aren't as community based, like Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or LinkedIn. What we recommend, and the best place to go do that, is two places. Number one, it can be commenting on the posts of your, target audience. So you suggested like hashtags. I've seen a lot of people have success with that, where you search hashtags that your dream listeners will use on their own posts, and then you go interact with them on their posts. If you do that, you want to make sure you interact with recent posts, because it's kind of weird when someone comments on a post you made a month ago.
Hello.
Yeah. And so that one absolutely works well, but an even better one where our students and our audience has found the most success in the non-community areas, because Facebook groups, Discords, that's like just the best place to do it. But if you want to grow an Instagram account, a Twitter, a TikTok, or a LinkedIn, we have every student in the accelerator complete an exercise that we borrowed from Russell Brunson called the Dream 100, where you come up with 100 people who are a few chapters ahead of you, who have already assembled your target audience, or at least a subset or a superset of your audience, right? So for me, that might be a Guy Raz, right? Of how I built this. Or a Pat Flynn, he's big with podcasters. And so you make a list of the 100 people that like you would want to be them, right? You would love to be at their level. And then you interact with people in the comments of their posts.
Okay. But not in a creepy way, right, Kevin? Like, that's where I feel like we have seen this go awry, especially in Facebook groups. So are there like 1 to 2 suggestions you can give listeners? Because our audience is really particular about not wanting to feel spammy.
Yeah.
Like, how do you guide them back to your show? Or do you just optimize your profile and they will find it?
Yep, great question. So it's a little bit of both. So you
Okay.
do absolutely want to optimize your profile to point to your podcast. And so this is a place where I say I don't think it's good to include the 400 things that you do. That's what a lot of people do on social media. They want everyone to see what a well-rounded and impressive person that you are. So I'm a mom, and I'm a CEO, and I'm
Are you
also a
reading
musician.
my Instagram right now?
No, I'm sorry if that's what you have on there. I totally swear I'm not. But people are like, oh, I do 400 things. And again, it's the same phenomenon that I mentioned earlier. Like, we want breadth, right? We want everyone to know that we have a massive, broad audience and we are interested in a million things. But really, if you just focus on one thing for now, you will get to breadth. So make your profile point to the show so that when people do interact with you and then check you out, there is a good chance they will enter your sphere, and start to consume. But where it really happens is in the DMs. And yes, I hear you when you're like, oh, but I don't want to be a used car 70s, salesman, right? So don't.
Yeah.
The key is this. As you do this, the goal is not conversions. So your goal is to spend 15 minutes on meaningful interactions with strangers on the internet, right? Or future friends on the internet, if you will.
Yeah.
Every single day. That is the goal. If you have done that, you have won. So you want to divorce yourself, first of all, from the outcome. Oh, how many people did I get to download my podcast today? That's not what we're doing. We're in the game of planting seeds, right? So you go to these places, have interactions, make internet friends, and almost inevitably, you will have 1 to 3, maybe 4 interactions with somebody, and they're warm enough where it just makes sense for you to tell them about your show. And when you sense that, and as you do this, you get a better sense for it. I'll tell you that right now. When you sense that, you then hop into the DMs and say, hey, it's Angie from this Facebook group or from Instagram. Really enjoyed chatting with you about this. We were just talking about XYZ, and totally shameless. But I actually have a podcast about this, and there's an episode that we made that I really think that you would enjoy and that would be helpful. Do you mind if I share the link? So 2 things I did there. Number 1, I said totally shameless, called it out. Hey, I'm going to share my podcast link. It is what it is.
Yeah.
You feel free to say no, right? So that kind of diffuses your own fear of spamming somebody.
Yep.
And then you ask permission, right? Do you mind? Are you interested in the link? Ask permission. If they say no, it's fine. Then move on, right? But if they say yes, let me say this quick. Yeah. If they say yes, don't give them the link yet. Ask them what platform they use to listen to podcasts.
Even better.
And then they'll say, oh, Apple, great. Then you send them the direct link to that specific episode, not just to your show, not to your website, but the specific episode hand curated for them in their listening app of choice. Because, by the way, some people will say, oh, I don't listen to podcasts. Then at that point, you're just like, okay, you're good to be friends. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's okay. That's going to happen. This thing is meant early on to grow an audience. You can do more scalable stuff later, like get yourself featured on other podcasts. Mm-hmm. But early on, this is how you do it. Ask permission. Ask them what app they use to listen to. Send them a hand-curated link. And then if you don't hear back, ask them in a couple of days, hey, did you get a chance to check out the show? What did you think? I'd love some feedback. And they'll say, oh, I forgot. I'm going to listen tonight every time. And then they will actually listen that night.
Okay. I know you and I kind of have just met. And actually, I could screenshot our DMs because I know I initially reached out to you. And I mean, it's almost like word for word. Like, we kind of chatted a little bit in the DMs. And then I said, hey, I'd like to have you on my show. If you think your listeners might be interested in what I offer, there could be overlap. So your approach is so similar. 3 things that I wrote down while you were talking that we advocate, and what I teach in the pitching space is first asking permission, right? Like, when we send pitches, we're not including scheduling links for the interview. People do that all the time, like assuming.
My God, so presumptuous.
Yeah. So we don't make presumptions about what the outcome is going to be. We literally suggest, here's an idea. What do you think? Like, that's all we're asking, is for the host to decide. So one other thing that we are very big advocates of is doing the legwork, right? Not just letting the host know, hey, I think I'd be a great fit for your audience. Tell me which of these 5 top topics would be the best. Like, we choose the Apple link, just like you said. We don't really choose the Apple link, but we choose the topic that is most relevant for their listeners because we do the legwork. So it's totally parallel to what you're talking about with the engagement. And then you also mentioned the follow-up. Like, that is the key piece of it. Just like Kevin said, most people don't listen to the podcast the first share. Most people don't say yes to the podcast interview on the first pitch. So this is just like beautiful synchronicity between how you teach it.
It's just interactions with human beings. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just how you should interact with how you collaborate with anybody to do anything.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because when I invited you on, I thought, okay, we'll talk about the TD and how it pertains to podcast hosts, and then we can make that jump to podcast guests. But it's so clear to me that if you are looking to be a podcast guest, then you need to identify your blanks who blanks who blanks as podcast hosts who blank and blank. And then that's what you focus your targeted daily engagement on. Like, that is how you find and interact with podcast hosts where you might be a good fit as a guest.
Exactly.
Am I oversimplifying it?
Not at all. And honestly, the game that we play as consultants, coaches, whatever you want to call us, is how can we take this thing with nuance and provide it in a way that somebody can simply implement, right? And that's part of the reason why targeted daily engagement has been such a hit, because it is so simple. It's just do this 15 minutes a day. That's it. You're going to see results. The other side of targeted daily engagement, in the way that we use it, is also to pitch guests for your show. So it's just the other side of the coin. Yeah. And we say the same thing, which is, cold pitches are not illegal, right? It's not that you should never cold pitch somebody, right, but it's just so much more fun it's really easy to turn it into a warm pitch, right? By just interacting, being social with the person on the internet. No matter how big this person is, it's probably them on social media. It's not their team, it's them. And like, that's honestly the quickest way to get in touch with them. And so if you have a couple interactions with them and you don't do what everyone else does when they get a little bit of attention from that person and immediately ask them for something, and you just have a couple interactions, just play it cool, right? Yeah. Then they're going to see you as a valuable member of their audience, as somebody who's, just an actual human being on the internet and not just yet another name that's trying to steal their time. And they're going to be just way, way, way more likely to say yes to you, which will enhance the work that you've already done to do the legwork and pick one solid ask.
I love it. This is perfect. I mean, I feel like this is the strategy for folks who might be struggling either growing their show or connecting with hosts before they pitch, or kind of warming up that pitch even after it's gone out. I mean, that's also fine, because typically the time frame of getting a response is often sometimes 4 to 6 weeks after you send the pitch. So there's time. I mean, if you send a pitch yesterday and you've never interacted with the person, you have time. Like, go interact with them intentionally and authentically, and it can make a world of difference.
Yeah, even if you've already pitched and they haven't answered, like, it's okay. Like, just play the long game, and just if you kind of do enough of this, kind of regularly, just like TDE, just kind of put in your work each week. Then some people, yes, it's going to take 6 months. Others it might take 6 hours. But if you're kind of just constantly tending the garden, pretty soon you'll have more flowers than you ever thought you could.
Love it. I'm picturing plate spinning. That's what I always equate it to, is like, you just keep them spinning and then eventually the momentum will catch up.
Yeah.
I have one more question that's not really related to grow the show, but do you pitch yourself? Like, what role has podcast guesting played? Because I heard you on Dave Jackson's show recently. Did you pitch yourself? Like, how does that factor into what you do to grow your own show?
Yeah. So far, I actually have not done too much of that myself, just because I've prioritized essentially other acquisition channels for now. I really, really wanted to learn Facebook ads. Like, it was just like, I really want to get good at it. Yeah. So sort of ironically, a lot of my acquisition so far has been through Facebook ads, because I just wanted to build that skill set. Yeah. However, I can say that we are internally starting to kind of move the, how should I say? we are getting ready to go to start pitching me on shows regularly.
Nice.
Like we're about to add that as an acquisition channel. And I'm excited because it's number one, way more fun. I know
totally.
Facebook ads now and I'm like, okay, I want to just be on podcasts.
Yeah, it's so much more like human.
Yeah. And so for like any shows that I have been on has been an inbound request. Like people have asked me, a couple of them have been swaps where, either I was invited first and then I said, oh, you should come on my show as well. Or it's somebody who I invited on to grow the show, and then they said, "Oh, you should be on my show." So that's been it so far.
Okay.
But like I said, I very much believe that this is the best bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. Just to speak from a business perspective, acquisition is being a guest on other shows. Yeah. So now that I've kind of done my little experiment with Facebook ads, we're gonna hit it hardcore.
So when you've appeared on other people's podcasts, did you see growth in your own show, opt-in growth? I know you have a webinar. Like, what were you driving people to when you were a guest?
So first of all, when I was on Dave's show, we beat our single day downloads record. So
nice.
That was my team was like, hey, we really got to get this guesting thing going. Because it really truly is. Like if you're in the game of growing up, and this is what I teach. That's why I said it's kind of ironic because I teach my listeners how to do this because it's a huge way of how I grew Philly Who. Mm-hmm. And so I teach my listeners, hey, first, like your first 500 listeners, do targeted daily engagement. If you can TDE your way to 500 downloads per episode. And then at that point, you still want to keep doing TDE because there's many other benefits in addition to that sort of person by person audience growth. But then it's time to add podcast guesting and getting your show featured on other feeds because that's completely scalable and that can double any show regardless of size.
I love that.
But in the meantime, I have been just experimenting with other stuff for my own show so that I can learn other ways, to help people out.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it is far and beyond the most effective and efficient way to grow a podcast is by having you or your podcast featured on other podcast feeds. Because number one, everybody that hears it is confirmed a podcast listener.
Yes.
And number two, they discover it in the context of being a podcast listener. So right then and there, they can just hop into, your show within the app that they're using. And so for that reason, my biggest call to action on podcasts is to listen to the Grow the Show podcast. Even though I do have a masterclass, I have a Facebook group, I have other lead magnets, but you're listening to me. If you're hearing my voice right now, you are in a podcast app. So the best thing that you can do to learn more from me, if you're interested, is to just pull out your phone right now, search Grow the Show, or the link might even be in the show notes.
It will be.
Yeah. So, but regardless, I don't think you'll include the link to every platform, right?
No, no, not.
Right. You can't. It's not possible. So whatever, listener, I'm speaking to you right now. Whatever app you're using right now to listen to this podcast, just open it up, search Grow the Show. And if I don't come up, add Kevin and you'll see my show and just pick the episode that seems the most applicable to you right now when it comes to growing your podcast. And if you can't figure one out, listen to the one with Robert Smith of Planet Money, which is just one of our favorites.
Yeah.
He mapped out how that show, which is one of the biggest NPR shows ever, basically is able to teach us economics in 20 minutes and just has a really, really tight, funny show about like really boring topics. And it's just extremely valuable for all podcast listeners to hear. It just completely has revamped so many of our listeners' shows and processes. And so that would be the number one thing to do.
Awesome. I love this. I so appreciate you kind of sharing with listeners, one, how they can connect with their own podcast audiences and grow it. I think it's very brilliant the way that you focus on TDE first, and then you transition it into really getting in front of bigger audiences, right? You do the one-to-one, which a lot of us in our business did from the beginning, right?
Yep.
Some sort of one-to-one outreach, and then you start getting in front of other people's audiences.
And I'll just add one thing about the TDE thing. Regardless of whether or not you ever enter my audience or sphere, it just is so much fun. And it brings you what you started this whole thing to begin with, which is interaction with an audience, right? Actually impacting people's lives, building relationships. It's so much fun. And all of this growth, it turns it from this big mystery, right?
Yeah.
Into just something that's really fun, easy, and explainable. So, even if you never check out any of my stuff ever again, please just give this a try. And I guarantee that you will experience business or podcast growth quicker than you are now.
Yeah. And with that human connection that we all crave, especially these days.
And without being a salesman, right? Nobody wants to be sleazy. And so the way to not be sleazy is don't be sleazy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Kevin, I am so excited to share this with my audience. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So so much for listening to this episode of Go Pitch Yourself. If you found this episode to be helpful, friend, you would be blown away by what we can accomplish together. Here are 2 next best steps. 1, be sure to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. That is twice a month, if that term confuses you as much as it does me. Each week that our episodes drop, I send an action-focused email, including an insider tip of the week based on the work that we do behind the scenes in our clients' business. For example, a recent tip of the week included how to estimate how large a podcast audience is. To get access to this exclusive content, pop on over to thepodwizegroup.com/pitches and sign up. As a special thank you, you'll get your first insider tip of the week as access to 6 pitches my team and I have sent that were accepted, including the core components of any great pitch. Number 2, schedule a call with me to figure out which of our services, if any, would be a good fit for you. We have a variety of ways to support you and your team in helping grow your business through podcast guesting, and I am pretty skilled at helping identify pain points and solutions. Hop over to thepodwizegroup.com/services and grab a spot on my calendar at the bottom of the page.